What if the chains you spent your life fleeing were never meant to imprison you, but to forge you? What if the very act of resistance, this ceaseless rebellion against authority, against order, against the weight of another's will, has not liberated you, but hollowed you out? You've been taught to despise submission, to see it as weakness, as surrender, as the final collapse of the will. But what if that teaching was a lie, a cleverly disguised prison of morality, built brick by those too afraid to kneel, not out of fear, but out of vision? Consider the river that obeys the canyon. Does it lose itself, or does it become more purely river, faster, deeper, sharper, because it has accepted the walls that guide its flow? You worship the idea of freedom as if it were a god, yet you tremble before the silence, before the discipline, before the long night of obedience. You call yourself free, but you are a slave to distraction, to impulse, to the noise of the crowd. True freedom is not the absence of masters. True freedom is a sovereign choice of which master you will serve, and when you will bend your neck, not in defeat, but in preparation for the leap. There is a kind of submission that is not degradation, but consecration, a voluntary descent into the depths, not because you are broken, but because you know that only from the abyss can you rise transfigured. The slave who resists every command remains a slave, but the one who chooses with cold clarity when to obey, that one holds power in his silence. He becomes the architect of his own subjugation, and in that paradox he discovers a weapon, the art of conscious surrender, not the whimpering compliance of the herd, but the fierce, deliberate act of a warrior who kneels, so that when he rises, the earth itself trembles. You have been told that power flows only from assertion, from dominance, from the will to command. But Nietzsche whispered another truth, that the greatest power often wears the mask of humility. The serpent that coils does not do so out of fear, but because it prepares to strike. The saint who bows before the altar is not weaker than the king who demands obedience. He may, in fact, be the only one who truly knows what power is. For to submit consciously is to master time, to manipulate perception, to let the world believe you broken, while inside you are sharpening your soul on the whetstone of restraint. So ask yourself, not what you would gain by resisting, but what you might become by yielding. What if your greatest strength has been disguised as your greatest shame? What if the path to mastery does not lie in standing tall, but in knowing exactly when and to whom you should fall to your knees? The game is not what you think. The rules have been inverted. And the first move of the awakened is not defiance, but the most dangerous act of all, deliberate, silent, sovereign submission. The question is no longer whether you can endure it, but whether you dare. You have trembled before the word submission, as if it were a curse carved into your bones by tyrants of old. Yet you submit every day. You submit to the alarm that drags you from sleep, to the gaze of strangers, to the invisible hand of expectation that shapes your smile, your posture, your silence. You submit to the fear of being seen, and to the deeper fear of not being seen at all. And still, you call yourself free. Still, you wear rebellion like a medal, while kneeling 1,000 times before altars you do not even recognize. But what if freedom was never the opposite of submission? What if it was its shadow, its necessary twin? What if the will to power does not begin with defiance, but with the courage to descend? There is a moment, rare, sacred, almost unspeakable, when a man stops fighting the weight upon his back and instead feels it, studies it, welcomes it, not because he is broken, but because he senses, in the pressure, a strange alchemy. The oak does not resist a storm. It bends, it groans, it lets the wind pass through its branches, and in that surrender, it learns the shape of its own strength. You've been taught that mastery means control, dominance, the iron grip of the hand upon the throat of chaos. But mastery is also the stillness before the strike, the breath held in the lungs, the silence that precedes a word that changes everything. And sometimes, often, that mastery wears a face of obedience. Not blind obedience, not the whimpering compliance of the herd, but a cold, deliberate, chosen submission, the kind that knows its time, its place, its purpose. Think of the warrior who trains under a master whose methods are cruel, whose words cut like glass, whose discipline feels like torture. He could rebel. He could walk away, cursing the cruelty, defending his dignity. But he stays. He kneels. He repeats the movement 100 times, 1,000, until his body forgets itself and becomes the movement. Why? Because he understands what the crowd never will, that the path to sovereignty passes through the valley of service, that to command, one must first learn to obey, not the man, but the law behind the man, not the voice, but the silence from which it emerges. The disciple does not obey the master. He obeys the discipline. And in that distinction lies the entire difference between slavery and transcendence. You fear submission because you confuse it with annihilation. You believe that to yield is to disappear, to be erased by the will of another. But what if the self is not something to be defended, but something to be forged? What if your identity, this fragile construct of memories, fears, and desires, is not the truth of you, but merely the mask you have worn too long? Nietzsche spoke of the Übermensch, not as a conqueror of others, but as one who has conquered the internal chaos, who has said yes to life even in its most terrible forms. And how does one arrive at that yes? Not by saying no to everything, but by saying yes to the right things, even when they burn, even when they break you. The fire does not ask your permission to transform the metal. It simply does. And the metal that resists is shattered. The metal that yields is shaped. Which are you? There is a deeper law here, one that operates beneath morality, beneath good and evil, beneath the noise of society's judgments. It is a law of transvaluation, the moment when you take what was once seen as weakness and turn it into your greatest weapon. The slave who smiles while being beaten may be broken, or he may be laughing at the master because he knows something the master will never understand. That true power does not reside in the hand that strikes, but in the face that does not flinch. That the one who can endure, who can wait, who can choose when to break and when to hold, that one hold the future in his hands. Submission, then, is not surrender, it is strategy. It is the art of becoming invisible so that when you appear, you are no longer who they thought you were. And what a love, what a devotion have you not, in your most secret moments, knelt before another, not out of weakness, but out of awe? When you looked into the eyes of one you could not possess, one you could not control, did you not feel a strange joy in your helplessness? Did you not, in that instant, touch something holy? Because love, too, is a form of conscious submission, the voluntary giving of power, not because you are less, but because you are more. The lover who surrenders does not lose himself. He finds himself in the other, and in that act, he touches the divine. Why then do you scorn submission in all other realms, when you have tasted its ecstasy in the one place you cannot lie? The world preaches autonomy like a religion, yet everyone serves something. The rebels serve his rage. The seekers serve his longing. The powerful serve their hunger. The only difference is whether you know what you serve and whether you chose it. Conscious submission is not the loss of will, but its refinement. It is the moment you stop reacting and begin orchestrating. You allow yourself to be shaped by a mentor, by a cause, by a discipline. Not because you are weak, but because you're building yourself into something stronger. like the arrow that submits to the bow. You let yourself be bent, because you know the release will send you further than you could ever fly on your own. The mountain does not boast of its height. It simply stands silent, while the winds carve its face and the snow crowns its peak. It does not resist the storm, nor does it claim victory over the valley. It merely is, and in that being, it becomes a mirror for those who dare to look up, not to measure themselves against it, but to ask, what am I becoming in my silence? You walk through fire tonight, not a flame, but thought, a fire that does not burn the skin, but the illusions beneath. And now, as the embers fade, you are left not with answers, but with a deeper kind of hunger, the kind that cannot be fed by noise, by approval, by the shallow bread of belonging. It hungers for truth, for weight, for a purpose heavy enough to justify the suffering of existence. You once believed power was taken, seized with clenched fists and thunderous words. But what if it is not taken, but forged in the quiet moments of surrender, in the deliberate choice to follow, to listen, to serve, not out of fear, but out of vision? The greatest transformation does not announce itself with trumpets. It slips in like dawn, unnoticed, until the darkness realizes it is already lost. And you who have questioned, who have trembled, who have resisted even this message, you are closer now than you have ever been to the threshold, not of freedom, but of self-overcoming. The old man who must be killed is not outside you. It is the voice that says you must always stand, never kneel, never yield, never obey. But what if the truest form of strength is not in standing, but in choosing when to fall, and when to rise, not as you were, but as you were meant to become? So let this not be an end, but an inversion, a quiet revolution in the depths of your will. The world will not notice at first. It never does, but you will feel it in the way you hold your silence, in the way you meet a challenge, in the way you no longer flinch at the weight of responsibility. You will begin to see masters everywhere, not as oppressors, but as mirrors, and you will choose them carefully, knowing that every act of submission is a step in the sculpture of a self. The chain you wear by choice is not a shackle. It is a link in the armor of the future you are building. And now, as you sit in the stillness after the storm of thought, ask yourself this, not with your mind, but with your blood: what will I serve, so that I may finally be free? If this echo found its way into the cracks of your certainty, if it stirred something ancient and unspoken, then do not let it fade into the noise. Share it, not because it is wise, but because someone out there is waiting for the words they cannot yet speak. Comment, not to agree or disagree, but to continue the descent. Subscribe, not for more content, but for the continuity of the journey. Because truth is not a destination, but a direction, and the path is long and the night is deep, but you are no longer walking alone.